I think there's a lot of opportunity to shed light on that and to, number one, normalize it and say, hey, all this is valid, all this is real. And in many cases, it's actually normal. And then on the other hand, to say, well, you don't have to live this way. There are solutions and treatments. And so I think bringing that into the forefront is really important for many women.
Welcome to Moving Through Menopause, the podcast unearthing the untold stories and candid conversations about a transformation that touches half of the globe, menopause. I'm Philippa, a chartered physiotherapist and movement expert. In this podcast, me and my generous guests delve deep into the world of menopause. We'll hear stories from real women who have navigated the complexities of menopause and come out the other side stronger and healthier. Buckle up and get ready to embark on a journey of empowerment and self-discovery as we embrace the change. Welcome to Moving Through Menopause. Hello, welcome to Moving Through Menopause. I'm Philippa, and we're moving through menopause. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Susan Baumgaertel, and we're talking all about menopause again. But today's topic is menopause, does it ever end? Well, hello, Susan. Dr. B, how are you doing today?
Oh, very good. Thank you, Philippa. Great to be here as usual. And yeah, it is a very daunting question, isn't it?
It certainly is. Does it ever end? Well, we know that the symptoms of menopause can be prolonged for some women, starting way before the periods finish and ending way after the periods finish. So, the thing for me that I always want to impress upon people is that even when we're asymptomatic, for those women who are lucky enough never to experience menopause symptoms, we say lucky, they probably feel lucky. And there are women, that have that experience, but are they lucky? How lucky are they? Because this is still happening to them, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'll just preface saying that even though I'm a physician, people should consult their own physician this is not personal advice, but yeah, it really is. It runs the full gamut. So it can be a confusing time for many women, like, where is this? What's happening? Why are my periods wonky? Is it menopause? I don't really understand what's going on. And then it can also be just, clear as rain, just absolutely, yep, one and done, last period, bye, I'm finished. And so it's really the full spectrum. And I think that's why the time frame can be confusing, because it's different for different women. And I find that many women will look to their mothers or aunts, or if they have a sister, people in the family or best friends, but, we're all on a different path. And so it becomes hard to you can't really compare it to someone else. It's your journey, even though there's a lot of commonalities.
Yeah. So there are some commonalities, aren't there, in that the average age in the Western world for a woman to hit menopause is 51. And on average, symptoms last, am I right in saying, for around 7 years?
Yeah, I think statistically that's probably right. Again, I feel like, there's always that bell curve, like the majority of people in the middle, and then there's the outliers, So it's true. There's some women who can have early menopause, and, early would be like 40, 41, but, 45, that's well before 51 or 52, but that's also a natural time for menopause. And other women who actually are having periods well into their mid 50s, God forbid. And, they're 57. It's like, oh my God, what's going on? I paid my dues. So truly it's good to know what's kind of statistically average, but not to feel bad if you're not in that big pack.
No, well, quite. And I mean, there are women who are on contraception, pills, implants, whatever. And so their periods, for some women, they don't really fully know even when they were menopausal or what because that was artificially suppressed, I suppose, by that medication.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if women have an IUD in place, and that's an intrauterine device, and that kind of elutes hormones. So it kind of tricks the body into usually not having periods. And then there are those women who go through premature ovarian insufficiency or early menopause well before the typical menopause age. And I know that when we talk about these kind of subjects, sometimes we leave out what happens to women when they have surgery. Some women have surgery to remove their uterus. They may still have their ovaries, especially if they're younger, and they cannot go by their periods as far as, when menopause is starting or finishing. So this is a full gamut. Again, I think it's good to know what the possibilities are. And if you're really wondering and you're not sure and something funny is going on, obviously see your doctor.
Absolutely. Yeah. Don't hesitate to seek help for unusual things that might be happening, and that goes for all medical conditions, doesn't it? If it's not normal for you, then your doctor hopefully can shed some light on it. So the common symptoms that women experience, hot flashes in the United Kingdom is something that is referred to commonly, but of course not everybody has that. Night sweats, cold flushes I've got here. And actually it's quite funny because I definitely felt cold, but apart from in the night when I would get hot. So,
and you want to feel cold, right?
I mean, it really does vary, as you say. Vaginal changes, emotional changes, and the trouble sleeping was my thing. Oh my gosh, that was just so debilitating. And actually, I read on a site that was, trouble sleeping was because we were having hot sweats. Well, it isn't that, is it? It isn't just that at all. So symptoms that may not, on the face of it, you might not think they are attributable to these estrogen fluctuations. There's increasingly an understanding that, these disparate symptoms, we put them together and what have we got? So we've got menopause on the way or waving, on the waving goodbye to menopause.
Rearview mirror.
Yeah, that's it. That's a good one. I couldn't think of that.
Well, so, you're right. The long-term effects, or I should say the common symptoms that kind of sometimes bleed into the long-term effects can really be a mishmash. But I like to think of like certain groups. I mean, the list is huge. I mean, some people say they're 5 or 10, some people 35. I mean, you can probably toss almost anything into this whole perimenopausal journey and call it, a symptom. But I think of like the vasomotor kind of symptoms, which tend to be like the hot flashes, the night sweats, that cold stuff. Let me tell you, for women who've had a hot flash, I mean, a bona fide hot flash, I find, of course, you feel like you want to rip your clothes off, but I find that almost what's worse, at least in my experience, was the cold that comes after. And it's momentary, but you're like super hot. You think you're going to just demonstrate that spontaneous combustion is real. And then suddenly you're freezing cold. And those people around you, and hint workplace dynamics, those people around you are like, well, a minute ago you're hot and now you're cold. What's wrong with you? So it's just that kind of like, blah, blah. It's really, it can be fast, rapid cycling, or it can be just like once or twice during the day. And, there are many factors that play into that, of course, too. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I think you mentioned the night sweats and of course, sleep disruption. You're right. It goes way beyond just waking up hot or sweaty. I mean, that could be why you actually wake up. It's like, oh, now I have to go pee. But truthfully, there's so many things that are changing in terms of what we call like our day-night rhythm, or that 24-hour circadian rhythm that is allowing us to kind of, wind down and rest at night. And there are so many other things that play into that beyond just the night sweats. But that can be a real slippery slope, because you and I both know that once you have at least 1 or 2 or 3, maybe in a row, 4 nights, then you're not thinking correctly. And then maybe you're more emotional, and maybe you can't handle stress. And maybe you're just, everything else just kind of cascades. And it really is kind of that tipping point for many.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That was definitely my experience. Maybe we're a bit forgetful, but showing to the mix, you haven't slept hardly and you really can't remember a thing. Yeah. And the stress levels, it really plays into a lot of those symptoms that might be bubbling under the surface otherwise. And then, this lack of rest, we might be in bed for the right amount of time, but we're really just not getting into that deep sleep that is restorative, and that was my experience. I was in bed for plenty of hours. It just wasn't doing the trick at all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's something where sometimes you feel stuck in a cycle and you just feel like you're just
Mm,
trying to break out of that cycle. It's very frustrating. And then I'm thinking of other kind of long-term symptom fallout, which would be that you mentioned the genital urinary or vaginal
mm,
complaints. I think that is sometimes kind of a box of problems that doesn't get opened. And I think many women either feel like, well, just goes with goes with my age, or they feel uncomfortable perhaps talking about it to the doctor, or maybe they don't have someone that they really communicate well with or that listens. And so it becomes a less of an issue. But vaginal dryness and atrophy, which is thinning of the vulvar area, and then often changes in bladder function. It could be
mm,
urinary tract infections. It could be, God forbid, a leak, a little bit of, didn't realize that came out when I laughed, cough, or sneezed. And then it could be just sensations or, libido that plunges, pleasurable experiences. So all of that is so important to address, but yet it's often put to the side. It could be someone's in a very busy visit and they have 10 minutes to do a
mm,
physical. And my gosh, that's the least thing they're going to talk about because it takes time. Or maybe they're again embarrassed or they grew up where you didn't talk about those things. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to shed light on that and to, number one, normalize it and say, hey, all this is valid, all this is real. And in many cases, it's actually normal. And then on the other hand, to say, well, you don't have to live this way. There are solutions and treatments. And so I think bringing that into the forefront is
mm.
really important for many women.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt that our intimate health is the poor relation quite often when we're having these conversations, and that we somehow as women we resign ourselves. This is our lot. Particularly if you've been through childbirth and all the hormone potentially that goes along with that to the tissues and things never feeling maybe quite the same afterwards. The acceptability somehow that decline is inevitable and this is just our lot. And really for us to challenge that because it truly does not have to be the case. I think, for me, we're talking today about menopause doesn't ever end. And without wanting to be negative, I think it's important that we appreciate these changes in our bodies are long lasting. There are long-term effects of declining estrogen levels on the body, on the tissues, the bones, the muscles, and the intimate areas, especially. And yet there is so much that we can do in terms of lifestyle medicine, but also medications where appropriate. But the first step is to talk about this stuff with somebody, a care provider. And so, I'm really, so it's not to be negative and say, oh, menopause, it never ends. It's really to say, honestly, unless we're doing something to redress that hormonal balance, it is in decline. And even when we do, hormone replacement therapy is not restoring the levels that we would have had when we were in our prime of reproductive years. So it's taking the edge off, but it's not restoring us to that state. And so, invariably, these problems can persist for women. And yet there's so much we can do. So, for me, we are towards natural approaches, but, hands up, I am a user of hormone replacement therapy and I will continue to do that potentially. Currently, that's how I feel till I die. But that could change. I'm prepared to admit that could change. But also, that even that on its own is not the answer, is it? And so harnessing natural approaches. And for me, me, movement is my modus operandi. And actually, I was in London this weekend at a health optimization summit. And I was slightly disappointed, actually, that the movement was not addressed more. There was lots of capsules you could take. Yeah, I know. Lots of electrical sort of products that you could use. But really what a lot of these products are trying to do is simulate the kinds of things we can achieve with exercise. Hurrah, thought I, because there's no doubt I'm on the right tracks with this movement malarkey. And so, please feel free to weigh in at this point, Dr. B.
Yeah. Oh, I love that story. In fact, that kind of that speaks to my basic fundamental truths and principles too. Unlike you, and this is not a good or bad thing in any way, but I'm not on hormones. I went through menopause a number of years ago, and I just decided that I could kind of navigate the ups and downs in ways that were different than, popping a pill. Not that you're popping a pill, but truly there's a family history in my genetic pool of breast cancer, even though I tested negative, and that's an important topic to talk about as well. Tested negative for the typical gene mutations of BRCA1 and BRCA2. I just really thought, I don't really, if I need it and I absolutely can't live without it, then I will take it. But I found ways to really navigate that. But getting back to your story about the weekend, I think that it's interesting when you're attracted to like, oh, this sounds great. It's a health summit. They should be talking about all these things. But then you realize they're kind of channeling into this kind of narrow path almost. I do believe that the mega $1 trillion supplement industry, you have to look at who's making money. I mean, I'm going to sound pretty cynical, but who's making money? And are they really touting these products because they're going to fix all your problems? No, somebody's making money off of them. So when you step back, like your example of, exercise and movement, that does so many things. We could wax poetic on that for 2 hours. That does so many things for your vasomotor symptoms. That can help your sleep. We know it helps with your mental health. Oh my God. It can help reduce risks for certain things like cardiovascular disease and on and on. And so that's pretty much free in terms of our body moving. You can take classes and you can pay someone for a trainer and belong at a club. But that to me that can be lifelong. And I know for you, it's a lifelong journey. And for many people, it is. So I think that is the better focus. And then add things along the way. Okay, if you need hormones, if you need mental health counseling and therapy, maybe you want to try cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. And there's something called CBTI or cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. It works really well. Maybe you want to try acupuncture, or there's other kind of herbal remedies. So there's a lot to incorporate into your kind of toolkit, so to speak. And it doesn't necessarily mean reaching for a prescription. But at the same time, I'm absolutely with you. Some women, you will cold this estrogen from my cold, dead body. I do know many women who have said that. Honestly, I do. And many of them are physicians. So it's true. We do miss something our body has been producing for many years. And it's navigating that, how much do you miss and how much do you?
No, absolutely. So I suppose we've covered this a little bit before, haven't we? When symptoms are maybe not what they should be, when should we be seeking help? I'll tell you this story. This morning, I was in a yoga class at my gym where I'm a member, and a lady next to me said, at the weekend, I was pulling weeds and I was sitting on the ground because my knees are not very good and this, that, and the other. And she was telling me that, and now I've got this pain in my arm. And 2 days ago, she was perfectly fine. And now she's got a pain in her arm. And for me, as a physiotherapist, I would absolutely love to see people who've had a pain in their arm for 3 days or a pain down the back of the leg for 3 days, because there's so much we can do in that moment to alleviate this suffering. And even if it's minor discomfort, for the most part, if it was major, you probably would have got help. But minor aches and pains, our lives are better without them, aren't they, at the end of the day? And there's so many things we can do, just a simple exercise that I happened to teach this lady as I was sat there waiting for the class to start because I can't help myself. She's like, oh yeah, that really speaks to this sensation I've been having. And, I'm hoping that she'll go away and do it and feel fine for doing it. Physiotherapy first aid is what I would call that. And so, why wait? Don't wait for these things to grow into something. But then, you as a physician, when it lands on your table and you're pulling your hair out, thinking, if only I could have seen this person sooner. Also, I'm sure there's occasions when that happens for you.
Yeah. And I think you've just described prevention of chronic illness, right?
Really?
Yeah. No, I think that there's a lot in that to unpack. And there's a lot of analogies I can make in terms of people that I see. And one example would be, osteoporosis screening. So when women who are fully in menopause and the years go by, the estrogen level's low and you are at increased risk, especially in that first 5 years in the beginning of the journey of menopause, postmenopause. Those first 5 years, your estrogen levels are missed by the body and those bone remodeling processes are not working at their best. And so you can actually see diminished bone density. Now, I should pause for a moment and say there's a difference between bone density and bone quality, and it's the two of them that go together to provide bone strength. But that's something to always really think about, and women should get a bone density screening test. And there are many ways to do it. In our country, I'm not sure about yours, but we call it a DEXA, which is a machine that looks at your lumbar spine and your left hip or one of the hips. You can go to kind of a knockoff DEXA in terms of like a health fair, and they'll often do your wrist or maybe your ankle. But there are ways to look at your bone density, and that's really helpful. The parallel also exists in the cardiovascular world. So women, if you're, let's just say 55, 65, which is 10 years technically after menopause, women are now at the same risk as men are as far as heart disease goes because they've had that protective estrogen when they were younger. So that's a time to really think, oh, okay, well, do I have any other risk factors? Your cholesterol can start rising as you're in menopause, unfortunately. Many women pack on a few pounds around the midriff, and that can, contribute. And maybe their glucose control isn't so good. And so maybe they're kind of a pre-diabetic, which is sad to say, run rampant in this country, not to mention diabetes. And God forbid someone smoking and doing other things that are really harmful. So you really add that up. And just the very fact of going through menopause and beyond is, unfortunately, when you hit 65, it's actually a risk factor for heart disease. So that's another kind of a screening approach. We talked about mental health briefly, but I do think that can be something to focus on throughout one's entire life. But when we go through this midlife phase, there's a lot of rocky kind of ground to navigate. You're trying to figure out who the heck you are now. What's my body doing? It's not doing what it used to do. And so that's very stressful. And maybe if you do have children, maybe you're an empty nester, or maybe if you have a profession, you're thinking about pivot changing or even career changing, or maybe retirement, or there's all these different things going on. Maybe you've had parents that have passed away or who are ill. And so there's a lot to unpack. And I know men go through that too in many ways, but we're talking about women. And so this menopausal phase is full of stress, and learning how to deal with that and cope with that is really key. I'll toss in one more parallel, which is really about cancer screening. And as we age, we may be at higher risks for certain cancers. And I think, again, that's just really kind of a hallmark ad to go see your doctor for your annual exam.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what you were saying then about aging, essentially we're not getting any younger, are we? And menopause is another kind of layer of complexity that we add into this picture. Our lifestyles contribute, our hormonal status contributes. There's so much that contributes to our long-term health prospects, if you like. And we are responsible for our own selves, aren't we, on this journey? And get help. We can get help. Help's out there. Do your screenings, do your regular checks. I think the thing in this country that it doesn't happen as a matter of course is screening for osteoporosis. So, but, even when women might be in that age group and have suffered a fracture, so falling from standing up on the pavement, theoretically, if we fall from stood still or barely moving onto a wrist, it should be able to withstand that force. It's when you fall from a height, or if you're, say you're running for a bus and you're traveling at speed and then you have a trip and a fall. But, theoretically, falling from standing up straight, our bones should be able to withstand that force. And if you experience a wrist fracture in your 50s and, you weren't really doing very much for that to happen, then that might just set off some alarm bells ringing that, then under those circumstances, you could potentially press your practitioner to undertake this DEXA scan that you're talking about. Like I say, it doesn't happen as a matter of course, which it might be nice if it did, but it doesn't currently.
Well, I'm really sad to hear that. And I know there's so many differences country to country. And so this is, I know what I know because I live here, but I feel like in some ways, the sadness that really I have when I hear that is like the horse is out of the barn, closing the barn door doesn't bring that horse back, right? So if you've already had a fracture that's unexpected, perhaps it wasn't necessarily a big trauma, well, then it's almost too late because now you know when you've had a fracture, you had an evaluation that oh my gosh, you have a very non-dense bones or thin bones. So it's all about prevention, and I guess that's really probably the nutshell is that we do have a different focus and dare I say insurance coverage and privilege. Perhaps it's a privilege to get a lot of these things done, but a different way to focus on preventing things from actually happening, like preventing a heart attack. So how do you prevent heart disease? How do you screen someone to see if they're adequately preventing heart disease? Same thing with a fracture or osteoporosis. But we digress, but I think that that's really something to think about. And I think maybe it just everyone keeps it on their radar and is thinking about it. That can be very helpful and useful.
Yeah. Well, precisely that, keeping this stuff on the radar, whether it's your intimate health, your mental health, your physical health, the resilience of the tissues, the bones, the muscles, and of course, what's going on inside of us with our hearts and circulatory system. And all of these can be impacted by these fluctuating hormones as we traverse menopause. But, we wanted to kind of end on a positive note, didn't we? And
always.
To say always that, this new lease of life potentially that we might find ourselves with extra time on our hands and maybe caring a bit less what people think of us, that might just free us up to take up new hobbies or try a new hairstyle. I mean, the possibilities are endless and overwhelmingly, women are positive by nature. We're optimistic, aren't we, for the most part? And there's a lot to look forward to. I cannot say that I've missed having periods. That to be, I definitely haven't missed that one little bit.
No, I think, well, that's one of the perks for women who are worried about pregnant. That's also another perk. You don't have to worry anymore or have to take anything for that. I do. And I know this word is used in so many different ways. One of my favorite words is wisdom. And I think that we do get a wisdom in this midlife phase that sets us up for later years and for aging in a way that hopefully is like we're giving a gift to ourselves. We're acknowledging what we've gone through and often many decades. And many times we've reached a point in our lives where we are able to be decision makers, or we are able to fulfill a lot of needs of our own and care for others in ways that are gratifying and to, like you said, try new things and experience life in fun ways that really maybe was less of a focus when you're younger and maybe starting a career, or for those women who are starting family and so on. So it's really a time of good reflection as your body's changing and coming into your own in a new way. And I think it's something to be celebrated, and everyone should do this much more than they already do.
Absolutely. Well, I concur and echo your sentiments 100%. So it's just wonderful for us to chat and almost be in the same room. I love the power of technology to bring us together from the other side of the Atlantic. And so thank you, Dr. B, for coming along and sharing your wisdom with us today. It's wonderful to see you again, and thank you so much for the time that you give today and all the work that I know you continue to do to help people and women in particular. So thank you. Thanks so much.
Always a pleasure to chat with you. I look forward to our next time.
Thank you.